Hello, book nerds. Welcome to Bookshelf Bunny. I'm Kim, and today we're doing a reading vlog and a review of Stephen King's new book, Fairy Tale. I was super excited to get my copy in the mail. I pre-ordered it in like March, I think, and finally got it on September the 7th. And as soon as I got it, I was so excited. I literally watched everyone on all of the Stephen King fan groups that I follow on Facebook celebrating the arrival of their copies. And I was so excited about mine, but I had to get through a work day and I had to get through errands, and by the time they got home and opened it up, and I was super stoked, but I was just too tired to start. So I started reading it the next day at work. First break, first thing in the morning, opened this beauty up and dove right in. So Stephen King's Fairy Tale is a fantasy tale, and it follows 17-year-old Charlie Reed. He has some family drama that he's working through, including an accident that took his mother's life and sent his father onto a path of alcoholism. This is like in the first 3 seconds of the book, so I won't be spoiling much. I'm just gonna tell you. Just before his father starts going to AA meetings, Charlie makes a promise that if his father can overcome this, then he will do whatever it takes to make it up to whatever deity is out there listening. That's his prayer, his promise. And fast forward a few years later, he comes across an old man in his yard who has fallen off a ladder and broken a leg. This old man, of course, is Mr. Bowditch. He's a grumpy introvert who just kind of keeps to himself in his super old Victorian house with his old dog named Radar. And as the story progresses, Charlie starts to feel obligated to fulfill his promise that he'd made as a kid by helping Mr. Bowditch. And that's what he does. And in the process of helping Mr. Bowditch as he recovers from his injury, he cares for the dog, Radar, who's very old, having arthritic issues with her hindquarters, and befriends Mr. Bowditch. Over time, Charlie discovers a secret in the shed behind the house, and this leads him to a whole other world. Hi. So in true Stephen King fashion, one world leads to another, leads to another. If you're familiar with the Dark Tower series, that's sort of the premise of the whole idea. There's even a line in one of the chapters, closer to the end of the book, where we're reminded that there are other worlds than this. And that made me super happy. So Charlie goes on an adventure with his dog Radar, and his goal is to save Radar's life. And of course, as soon as I realized that the dog was a major player in the story, my first thought was, if the dog dies, I'm gonna riot. And so I spent the rest of the book, I think I was more invested in the dog's story than I was in Charlie's story, but of course it goes hand in hand. So as Charlie is trying to fulfill his quest, he takes his dog with him into this world, and he follows the path that Mr. Bowditch laid out for him. And as he goes along, he comes across various fairy tale aspects. And Stephen King kind of pulled and amalgamated different fairy tales into his book, hence the title, Fairy Tale. So I really enjoyed it. I thought the characters were exciting. I liked Charlie. Charlie was a good kid, but also kind of badass. Don't mess with this 17-year-old. And I felt like the plot, even though it was fantastical, was believable. It was exciting. I like that it kind of pulls on threads of other Stephen King books, making connections to there are other worlds than these. That was exciting too. And all in all, I gave this one a 5 out of 5. I was thoroughly impressed. It grabbed me, it hooked me. It took me about a week to finish. If I'd had more time, I probably would have finished it much sooner. But I focused all of my energy on reading this book. It was so good. So I highly, highly recommend Fairy Tale by Stephen King. Definitely check it out. All right, book nerds, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Has anyone else read this book? And if you have, do you agree with my rating of 5 out of 5? If you haven't, how do you feel about Stephen King, the master of horror, as it were, when you realize that he doesn't just write horror? How does that grab you? Okay, book nerds, that's it for me. And as always, happy reading.